don't know me, my name is Matt Scheurer. Based on some of the things I've seen today, grab a copy of the slide deck at slides.dfirmat.com. That'll take you to my GitHub repo, and you can grab the PDF out there. So pleasure to be here. Let's go ahead and get started. So I work for a big, well-known organization, vice president, computer security incident response. I do a lot of DFIR stuff. I've got a podcast that's been in the dustbin for ages, and one of these days I'll resurrect it. But if you're not connected with me already on LinkedIn or the X social media platform, do feel free to hit me up out on those. So I do some volunteer work. I'm an official hacking is not a crime advocate. That's not to say cybercrime is crime, right? Hacking is not a crime. We are at a hacker conference. We are hackers, and we're not necessarily breaking the law. We're just doing what we like to do. I'm also on the advisory board for the IT and cybersecurity program at the Warren County Career Center, where I live in Ohio, and I have some issues with how we kind of teach people. We try to get people to run in security before they've ever learned how to crawl and walk. I'm trying to help fix that. I'm also the WAMSA mentor, technical mentor. WAMSA is the Women's Security Alliance. If that speaks to you, they're always looking for mentors and mentees. Do get involved. I'm just here speaking on my own behalf. Nothing I say represents my employer. So the origins of social engineering, because we're going to talk a lot about where social engineering came into play with technology. Some believe social engineering dates all the way back to the Garden of Eden, but regardless of what you believe, deception and trickery have likely been with us for a very long time. Social engineering technology really it was inspired by telephony, which begat phone phreaking. And we're going to talk a lot about phone phreaking in this talk. But the telephone system, why did it start there? Because it was the world's first interconnectable global network. Before there was DARPA, the internet, and the World Wide Web, and everything else, you had the phone system, and that was how you could communicate all over the world in pretty much real time. And that was the first thing that allowed people to do that. It was built by telephone companies, or telcos for short, and we're going to talk a lot about phone phreaking. Note about telecom history. So when I'm giving you timelines, understand that where you lived would depend an awful lot about what your telephone stack would look like, from the telco-operated phone switches and so on and so forth. My father actually used to work for the phone company, so what I can tell you is unless the demand absolutely necessitated them replacing, upgrading equipment, it generally didn't happen until the ongoing maintenance costs necessitated it. So, yeah. Different timelines, different communities. So when I'm talking about things, you may be like, well, we didn't really see that for a long time after that, or something like that. Just bear in mind that these timelines were fluid. But starting in the 19th century and onward, we had phone operators, and these were operators that would literally operate a switchboard where they're unplugging and plugging in cables to route phone calls. It was very much a manual process. The early phone system used what were called party lines. So, for example, on your street, they might say your house is ring number 3. Your next door neighbor might be ring number 4, and that's when you knew to pick up. There is no expectation of privacy, though. You might be ring number 3, but the people down your neighborhood might pick up and just eavesdrop and listen in because they're nosy. So there was no assurance of privacy. The late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Scheurer step-by-step, or SXS switches, came into being, and these continued growing in footprint during the early 20th century. What's key here is this began the era of automation in the burgeoning telecommunications industry. And it's that automation that allowed people to start taking advantage, and we're going to delve into that here momentarily. But in the 1940s to the 1950s, AT&T developed automation using audible tones for long-distance call routing. Multi-frequency signals were used for the telephone number digits, and then the signal frequency tones were used for status signaling. That's the commands that the phone switches would use. These advancements paved the way for phone phreaking blue boxes in the future. Now, I brought some cool artifacts with me. I had no idea. So for the record, I did not swipe this off the registration desk here at KakalakiCon. Prior to that, I'm going to guess that there are a lot of people here that have never touched, seen, used one of these. It's a rotary dial telephone. Now, the way this worked is you have a dial pad with holes that are numbered, and if you wanted to dial a number, you would put your finger into the hole, you would dial it to the metal stop, and let it go. Now, when you're listening, you can hear the pops and the clicks happening on the back end, and that was really how the number was going to the phone switch. To dial a second 5, I put my finger back in the hole, I spin back to the metal stop, and then if I wanted to dial a third 5, again, put my finger in the hole, dial it to the metal stop, let it go, and you can hear it winding back. It was actually work and, a lot of effort. And you had to be a little bit patient, too. So, sore fingers, that's a great point, because some people would, if they were worried about breaking their fingernails, they might use the pencil eraser. Yes, absolutely. There you have it. So, from the 1950s, 1960s, beginning around the mid-20th century, telephone companies began more widely deploying advanced circuit switching technologies like panel and crossbar. And these switches, along with reliable transistors, paved the way for viable dual-tone and multi-frequency, or DTMF, support, often referred to as touch tones on phones. Now, I have another phone that looks similar to the first one, except this has a standard number pad on it that you could use to dial the numbers, and this is maybe a little more modern. It looks a little more familiar. What's interesting is this had a switch on it for tone, which were the touch tones, but you might live in an area that didn't have that support, so you would switch it to the pulse mode, and that would emulate that rotary dial telephone to dial out the call. Basically, once you pick it up, you have your switch hook, you could dial. If you heard pulse, you would sound like a rotary phone, and that would be how you would make your phone calls. So what's interesting about this as well is it had modular jacks. When you look at the rotary dial phone, everything is hardwired. Now, people didn't own their own phones. That was leased equipment from the phone company. So if you sucked up the cord in the vacuum and tore it up, you had to make a service call to the phone company, and they would have to send somebody out to replace the wire. They realized what a hassle that was, so they started implementing modular jacks in these, so you could replace your own cords. They could just send it to you in the mail, and took care of a lot of problems. Also made it swapping out a lot faster. So the 1970s to present, electromechanical switches were slowly being phased out in favor of newer digital switches. So electronic switching system, or ESS, kind of started coming around, and the migration to digital switching was the beginning of phasing out of analog technology in favor of digital telephony. And if you fast forward to way more recent times, voice over IP, or VoIP, has largely been displacing all these other technologies, including the digital technology. So phone phreakers, who were the phone phreakers? Well, they were people who enjoyed exploring the phone system, those who loved experimenting with technology. Some were obsessed with learning the science and technology behind telephones and phone networks. That sounds an awful lot like a hacker, right? And so indeed, a lot of phone phreaks started learning hacking, and a lot of hackers would want to use the phone service to connect to remote systems, and we're going to talk about that. And it was called war dialing. Now, I brought something with me. Before there were internal modems, there were external modems, and before there were external modems, there were these. This is an acoustic coupler. Now this is actually smoking. This is a 1200 baud acoustic coupler right here. So those early ones, they were like 100, 150, 300 maybe if you were on the high end. Yeah, 1200 baud, baby. This is really chucking through the data, right? And the way this worked is, again, you didn't have external modems, so you would have one of these, and you have basically a serial or parallel port that you would then feed into your computer, and essentially you have your phone handset, and you put that in the cradle, and you actually have some soundproof insulation going around. And the way this worked was the computer would generate tones, and so the mouthpiece would be used to send tones to the remote computer. The earpiece would receive the tones back. So basically you have a computer converting digital signals to analog tones, and then on the other end you're doing the opposite. You're taking these digital tones and these analog tones, converting them back into digital. And that's basically the way the early computers could communicate with one another. So I want to talk about movies. Anybody here see War Games? Yeah, a lot of people. So if you've seen War Games, you know what this is. So Phone Phreaker motivations included a thirst for knowledge, meeting and talking with other phone phreaks. I can't underscore this enough. Pranks and mischief. Not only did you like messing with the people you didn't like, you almost liked messing with your friends even more. Now I have to explain this last one to some people. Some of you get it, but some of you may not have been in this era. So making free phone calls to anyone anywhere. That doesn't make sense now because I've got a mobile phone. I can call probably anybody in this room and talk as much or as little as I want. My monthly bill doesn't change. It stays the same. Back in the day, the telephone companies would charge you upwards of $1 a minute for long-distance phone service. Think about how much screen time you probably have with your phone and tablets and stuff today. Imagine you had to pay $1 a minute for every minute of screen time. You would either, one, just not use the devices, or two, figure out how you can get around having to pay that. And I do need to add this statement. If you were a kid or a teenager and you ran up a $400 phone bill in 20th century money, when your parents saw that, you were going to be in bigger trouble than that time my boss yelled at me and grounded me for an entire month when I tried to file a business expense report for this outfit. Talked about phone phreaking in film. 3 Days of the Condor actually heavily inspired Kevin Mitnick. His old hacker handle was Condor, in fact, taken straight from this movie. War Games, a lot of you have seen it, and if you haven't, go watch it. Movie Hackers is obviously well known within this community, so released in '95, and we'll talk a little bit about some red boxing stuff that they kind of demoed in there, and then for those of you who've seen the made-for-TV movie, Pirates of Silicon Valley, good movie. And so what they highlight was really how Apple got their start. Steve Wozniak was building blue boxes and selling them so people could make these free phone calls, and we're going to talk all about blue boxes here in a minute. And so that money actually seeded Apple Computer, which became, of course, Apple. Classic phone phreak tools. So there were music instruments and whistles that would play the same tones that the phone system would use. There's a bunch of phreaker boxes. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them: blue boxes, beige boxes, and red boxes. But there were a lot more that did specific things, and sometimes you had rainbow boxes that combine multiples of these things. We're going to talk a lot about payphones, tape recorders, and scanners and radios. So phone switching and tones. The early phone system used, as we talked about, audible control tones, and some musical instrument notes would actually play the same frequency as those tones. And for dual tone stuff, if you played 2 notes together, that might also get you those signals. So whistles and whistling. Captain Crunch breakfast cereal once included a free whistle as an in-toy giveaway capable of producing a perfect 2600 hertz tone. I so happen to have Captain Crunch whistle here. There's your 2600 hertz tone. I just cover the inside hole and blow it, and you could use that to seize a trunk and go about making a free phone call. And then a lot of people that experimented with the phone system were visually impaired, legally blind, if you will. and a lot of them became really good at whistling specific tones. They could actually just, with their mouth and their lips, whistle the tones they needed through practice. So very impressive skill. Blue boxes, I don't have one yet. I've asked a friend about building me one who's way better with electronics than me. We'll talk a little bit more about these, but these were used for controlling phone switches and gave people the ability to make free phone calls, and this would actually play that 2600 hertz tone, all the numbers and some other tones that would allow people, again, seize the trunk, go about establishing their phone call, and we'll talk a little bit about phone phreaker conference bridges and stuff like that here in a moment. Beige boxes. A beige box is simply a lineman's handset, or a homemade variety thereof, and you could use it to connect to a phone wiring block, or if you found a jack, you could use that. So it was used to tap into phone lines or connect a new extension on a discovered phone block. Now I brought a few different varieties here. This is an actual real deal lineman's handset. This is an AT&T model. This is very much what the phone company technicians would take with them. And these have, this is very durable, by the way. I could beat on this podium with it. It would probably put all sorts of dents in the podium, and this thing's going to be just fine. These had alligator clips on the end here, and so you could, again, attach to something, or these alligator clips have sharp teeth. They could actually pierce the insulation on the phone wires, so people could tap into a phone line. The other person would be completely unaware. Now these, even if you get one now, they're kind of expensive. Back in the day, they were very expensive and pretty hard to find. Now I wouldn't endorse it, but maybe you could find an unlocked telco van and see what gear was in there and help yourself if you really wanted one of these bad, right? Again, I don't endorse it, but I'm sure it happened. All right, so homemade variety thereof. So this is another beige box, and this is just simply lopping the end that has the RJ11 on the end, and basically putting on your own alligator clips on the wires. And so if you didn't have money for a real deal lineman's handset, you could just kind of fashion your own. And so this is ideal because you got the switch hook right here on the handheld. You got all the numbers, you got the tone pulse, and a bunch of other features. This had everything built into the handset, so the cradle was really just a hunk of plastic. And so these were perfect for using for making your own beige box. So I was kind of curious. I'm like, all right, so I'm just wondering, is there a big online retailer I could just order one today, just tailor-made and drop shipped to my house? For less than $20 on a certain online large retailer, you can order a beige box. And this is, again, less than $20, very inexpensive. What's really cool is that I remember having to carry like two different line cords around, one with alligator clips, one with a jack, because you never knew what you might encounter. What they did is they basically spliced the cable. They put the alligator clips on, and then you have a jack, so no matter what you ran into, you would be able to clip on or jack in, whatever the case may be. And I look at this and I think it's so simple and elegant and such a perfect solution. I wish I would have thought of it myself, and it's so obvious now looking at this that, like, man, why didn't I think of that? Payphones. We're going to talk a lot about payphones here. So they were once very commonplace. They provided a physical layer of separation from home, and they offered a certain level of anonymity to the users. And what I mean by that is you could go to a payphone, call somebody, and the person who received the phone call could deny they knew who they were even talking to. Like, I don't know, the phone rang, I picked up and answered. There wasn't caller ID, so there was somebody on the other end, we just started talking. I had no idea who it was. Conversely, you could actually call a payphone and it would ring, and the person at the payphone could pick up and start talking as well. And it's the same thing, right? There well, I was just at the convenience store getting something to drink and like a candy bar, and next thing I know, the phone starts ringing. So I picked up, and there's somebody on the other end, so we just started talking. I really don't know who it was. So you had a level of deniability for callers. Now, I didn't try to put a whole payphone inside the suitcase. However, I did bring with me a payphone handset, and this has the armored exterior cable. It's got the reinforced steel cable inside, and you got a nice nub here at the end to keep people from being able to just rip this thing off. But what's cool is it's really just a standard handset. We got an RJ9 that would plug into any of these phones I brought out earlier. And again, these were pretty durable. And the thing with payphones is that you would load them up with money, you could make your phone call, and you might guess that rather than putting quarters, dimes, and nickels into the payphone, there might be a way around that. So let's talk about Redbox tones here. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. So hopefully people heard that. That was a quarter on a Redbox. That was a quarter, Redbox quarter for a payphone. In the early days, you could just pick up and into the mouthpiece, you could just play that tone over and over and load it up with a bunch of fake money and then make your call. A little bit later on, the phone company kind of caught on to that, and they're like, all right, we're not going to listen for anything coming in that mouthpiece until there's an established phone call. That's where the social engineering kind of comes into play, because then you would just call the operator, ask for a phone number, and they would give you the number, and like, oh, my pencil just snapped, or my pen ran out of ink, or, ugh, this keypad is totally gross. I don't even want to touch it. Could you patch me through to that number? And they'd say, yes, please insert 75 cents for the first 5 minutes. So, again, in the mouthpiece, we just play our Redbox tone, and over, we load it up with fake money. So, as tactics changed, phone phreaks had to kind of change their tactics and roll with the times. It was very much that cat and mouse. Now, it's not at all like today, right, where we have attackers and defenders, and we keep challenging each other and raising the bar and all this stuff. Might sound a little familiar, right? So we talked about red boxes and what enabled people to do. Tape recorders. So for those not adept at building, you could build an electronic red box that would play the tones. Now for myself, I actually generated these using a tone generator. All I'm ever going to admit to is being 21 till I die. That might be a little suspect. What isn't is I really did generate those tones myself. And so I have the Canadian payphones, which were single tone, the United States. I even have 10 and 50 pence pieces from a British pound tones that I had. But the other thing you could do is if you could record these tones as they were playing, you could play them back. Now, today we would call that a replay attack. We didn't really call that back then, because now we think of replay attacks as being, authorization tokens of some sort, session cookies, maybe packets. Not as much now, but still potentially. And so back in the day, though, if you recorded tones and played them back, again, we didn't call them replay attacks. That's kind of what they were. So you had a couple different options for recording stuff. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter if you were recording stuff for tones or just recording stuff just to have it. If you had access to modular jacks, you have one of these, which you basically just plug it in between on your phone cords, and then you have a line out that is, you could put it into a line in or a mic jack on a recorder and record it that way. And this was relatively clean. The thing you have to remember is the phone quality wasn't always the best, so there had to be some pretty accepting tolerances there. It's sort of like not good locks, and you have a really easy shear line that's you got all this tolerance and stuff. So if you didn't have that though, because like the payphone, well, you didn't have access to the jack. there might be other phones where you didn't have access to the jack. So yeah, you could always use one of these. And this is essentially an inductor coil with a audio line on it. And the way this works is you just put the suction cup on your phone, and as the signals are vibrating, the inductor coil is moving. It's transferring that back into an audio feed, and then you're just feeding it into your recorder. So even if you didn't have access to modular jacks, you could use this to record phone calls, tones, whatever have you. So this was if you didn't have modular jacks. Again, you may not have as good a quality, but it still worked. Scanners and radios. Scanners and radios were capable of listening to wireless communications and also consequently eavesdropping on conversations. Remember the party line stuff we talked about? So, people could unwittingly bug themselves with cordless phones, completely oblivious to the fact that they just, they're broadcasting, they're transmitting. It's not encrypted, so anybody that happens to be listening in could do just that. So the early cordless phones operated in 43 to 50 megahertz range. Later on, we had these 900 megahertz phones. And initially, the security was just as bad. It's just that not many people had a radio scanner capable of reading the 900 megahertz range. Earlier cellular phones actually operated in the 800 megahertz range, and actually scanners, the FCC got involved, and manufacturers had to stop allowing you to receive these cellular signals, and those were cellular blocked scanners and radios. I don't know to this day if they ever repealed it, even though we haven't used 800 megahertz for cellular communications in forever. What was interesting, though, is if you had an old school 800 megahertz phone, something that was sort of grandfathered before the laws, you could listen in on those. Also, Canada had the same frequencies, same steppings, that sort of thing. So a lot of people could go on a camping trip north of the border, pick up a scanner in Canada, and drag it back with them. So there's a few ways around it. Baby monitors also operated in the same frequency ranges as cordless phones. People would unwittingly bug themselves. They have no idea that everything they say is getting picked up. So anybody who happens to be listening in on scanners and radios could listen in on entire conversations that people think are private in their own home. Now, I didn't bring in my old school scanners and radios because they're kind of big, bulky, and heavy, but I brought some SDRs with me. So this is a Newelec, Generation 1 software-defined radio. This wouldn't do the lower frequencies as really old cordless phones, but it absolutely would do the 900 megahertz stuff and the 800 megahertz stuff. And so also, I've got a little bit newer. This is the version 3 of the RTL SDR. These are very inexpensive, by the way. I haven't got my hands on the new version 4 yet. But I will at some point. These are great fun to play around with. Highly recommend it. But these will do, really what any scanner radio would. It just uses software for the magic. PBXs, so private branch exchanges. These were switches that were operated by organizations, typically small organizations. Today we have MSPs, MSSPs, that sort of thing. Before it was actually big business for people to help organizations with their phone service. So they would set up, deploy, manage, maintain their PBXs for them. Larger organizations that had their own telco department could, actually do it themselves. But these provided internet-connected phone services between people. And what's interesting is even though these are comparatively much smaller than the telco phone switches, they had features and capabilities that those didn't have for a long time. So think about phone extensions, voicemail, all those things, call forwarding, three-way calling. Sometimes it's a premium service, wasn't always available, but PBXs allowed organizations to have all of that stuff. They were also ripe for abuse. So enumerating employee phone directory abuse. Today, for you offensive security folks who do your OSINT, you're probably looking on LinkedIn, right? You're gathering all kinds of details on person and what they know and what they use through LinkedIn. We didn't really have that before there was ever LinkedIn, but what you could do is you could call a business and do dial by name, where you're punching in the first 3 letters of their last name, and you could just kind of go through, the entire thing and document out the employee directory. You figured out the names, you knew what extension they were at, all those sort of things. So you could use that for essentially getting a nice data set that you could then use to potentially social engineer people down the road. And so compromising voicemail boxes and listening to saved messages. Not surprising if you had like a 3-digit telephone extension or the person you're interested in, chances are their voicemail box pin were the same 3 digits as their extension. So it's very easy to sort of compromise voicemail boxes and listen to saved messages. If you thoroughly owned a PBX, you could actually set up your own voicemail box. Now that's really useful for social engineering, because then you could say, hi, my name is Joe and I'm at this extension. Hey, I've got a question about this. Please give me a call. Person calls. They get your voicemail, they leave a message. Well, you can go back later and retrieve it. You can literally play phone tag and use that for social engineering, getting all sorts of information from people, and also making yourself seem like a legitimate company employee, right? So this is one of my favorites. Transfers to phone extension 91 or 9 in some other country code for social engineering people. The way this works is you call up the business. Hi, this is Steve. I'm with the phone company. We're doing some line testing. I need you to do me a favor, please. Transfer me extension 91. Now, 9 gets you an outside line. 1 is the prefix for a long-distance phone call. So if they transfer you to extension 91 and you've got a dial tone, well, you can just dial whatever number you want after that, and you're not the one getting stuck with the bill for it. It's the organization. And this was really effective because phone companies billed in arrears, like at least a month in arrears. So right now we're in May. If this happened, you wouldn't even know this happened until you got your July phone bill if you were going through it and paying attention. Sometimes 8 was what you needed to get an outside line, but same principle. And then call forwarding. So consequently, if you own a PBX, well, let's just transfer extension 555 to this other phone number I want. It could be a long-distance number, right? So again, I call in, I get this extension. Now I'm actually getting forwarded to a number I wanted to dial, and I could change that number up. And again, we're talking upwards of $1 a minute long-distance calls that you yourself are not paying for. The business that you're compromising their PBX is the ones paying for that. Diverters were similar. So like if an organization had an after-hours answering service, it would transfer the calls to the call center that would take notes and give these call with hey, here's who called, and here are the messages that were left while you were away. And if they were misconfigured, when the person on the other end, the diverter's misconfigured, you might have an open dial tone after you left your message. Well, then you could piggyback on that and again dial out the number. So Phone Phreak tradecraft, dumpster diving, everybody here should be familiar with what that is. And then the thing is that people would write passwords, they write pins, they write all sorts of stuff. But manuals were also a prime target. Why would somebody want to get phone manuals? Because if I'm going to call the phone company and say, hi, I'm the customer, and I need to disconnect service, or I need to move service to this other address, or I need to have all our stuff forwarded, if I'm going to try to socially engineer the phone company employees, I better be able to sound like a phone company employee when I'm doing that. So these were some prime treasures with dumpster diving or trashing. Call routing loops and three-way calling. Nowadays we have man in the middle, adversary in the middle, whichever acronym you like to use. So these were, again, you could set up call loops and have, your own makeshift party line. If you could abuse a PBX or, the phone company switches themselves, you could set up your own little party lines with your phone phreak buddies. And you could also do the same thing with, the where you're eavesdropping in. You could just listen in on entire conversations, and two people think they're having a private conversation, no idea you're listening in. You could also be listening in and decide, all right, I'm going to wait for my moment. Now I'm going to inject myself and freak both people out. So those kinds of things definitely happened. And again, we didn't call them, man in the middle, adversary in the middle back in the day, but that's exactly what they were. Everything we deal with now is, steeped in something in history, and generally speaking. Social engineering, phone operators, and other telco employees, we talked a good bit about that. Calling cards, so fraud and abuse. Probably nobody in this room has had a calling card in forever, if you ever had one. But generally the phone company would give you a calling card that you could dial a toll-free number. Didn't matter if you were at a pay phone or using somebody else's phone and you didn't want them paying for the call. You could call that, you could put in your own number, and you could put in the PIN, and then it would get billed back to you ultimately rather than wherever you're placing the phone call. But consequently, people would trade these things. They would go raid mailboxes so they could get phone calls. This was a big deal once upon a time. Telco countermeasures, we talked about this just a moment, but they started implementing various fraud controls to detect, flag, block phone phreaking efforts by the 80s. So the old methods, like we talked about, no longer worked, and so it forced people to adjust their tactics. And the countermeasures really forced phone phreaks to sort of upping their game, changing how they did things. Switchboard operator careers obviously have mostly been displaced nowadays. Really the market saturation of mobile phones made deploying and maintaining payphones financially feasible for telcos. So you rarely see them, and I'm such a dork when I do see one, I have to take a picture of it. I don't know, I'm weird like that. But anyway, payphones have largely disappeared from the landscape, and nowadays the proliferation of unlimited and flat rate cellular calling plans, really it's eliminated the incentive to even try to steal a phone call. There's no point in it now, essentially. And so most new telco platforms are based on voice over IP, which shouldn't surprise anybody in this room. And the calling card fraud that I talked about a moment ago, it's largely gone away, but credit card fraud is obviously huge business. In the new underground phone phreak bridges, these conference call party lines and virtual meeting places, they've gone away because you have web conferencing platforms. You have encrypted communication mobile apps like Signal, and Telegram is one that's getting heavily leveraged by a lot of threat actor groups. And encrypted communication, so dark nets, including the dark web, these dark marketplaces, very prevalent now. So data dumps, dark marketplace use today is much more prevalent, I would say, than probably old school dumpster diving. Mobile malware, you could argue that's not really phone phreaking, but it is an attack surface that didn't used to exist, and it absolutely exists today. So we have toad attacks, these telephone-oriented attack delivery attacks. We have text message, links, and it's just another way to try to socially engineer folks. So proxy servers, VPN services, and Tor. We talked about the anonymity that a payphone would have. Really those types of services have, displaced it, if you will. And also the fact that there really aren't too many payphones left. In the epilogue here, technology and telephony abuse is less of a technology hobbyist, enthusiast, and prankster activity now. It's really big business. So advanced persistent threats, threat actor groups, hacktivists, financially motivated actors, organized crime, and nation states are doing this stuff now. And lest anybody think that all forms of phone phreaking are completely dead, reverse toll fraud still happens. Those are international or high dollar pay per minute numbers. And so if you can compromise a phone system, dial these things, and you're in cahoots with whoever's operating that high toll number, usually overseas, and you can split the profits with them. And so web conference calls. Everybody remember the early part of the pandemic when the default Zoom security settings were pretty bad, so Zoom bombing was a huge ordeal. And so it forced people to really harden that. But that's still, people are still trying to do that, vishing and smishing that we talked about kind of a little bit ago. Porting or port out fraud is migrating a mobile phone number to a different service provider. If I can convince a, like maybe Boost Mobile or something like that, hey, I want to move my phone service to you guys. Here's my number. You may have to bribe the employee at the store, but they're probably not getting a great wage anyway. So for enough money, and if you check around enough, you probably find somebody willing to do it. And that's happened a lot with not just port out fraud, but SIM swapping. Same thing, really. Since this is an old school kind of talk, just some quick shout outs here. 2600 magazine. We talked about the significance of 2600 and blue boxing. This magazine has been around since 1984. It's now been known for a long time as the Hacker Quarterly. Just behind it, the phreak e-zine. And I heard they were actually putting out a new volume of that. I haven't looked, but it goes back to 1985. Every once in a great while, it kind of comes back to life. Phone Losers of America is a great resource for phone phreaking stuff. They still do a lot of fun stuff today. They actually operate a conference bridge that you can call and talk to other phone phreaks. Now, you might want to be careful about the kinds of information you share with strangers on a phone phreaker bridge, but if you're brave, give it a try. And then Project MF. For those of you thinking, man, that blue boxing and all this phone phreak stuff sounds amazing. Too bad I missed out on it. So Project MF is multi-frequency. They have a software blue box that you can get. They have an asterisk-based distro that you can spin up. And they also have plans. You can use an Arduino and build a modern blue box. And they have a number that you can call and test with and do old school retro phone phreaking. It's all simulated, but it really works. So have a look at that. Just a quick shout out for textfiles.com. It's archived a lot of old BBS stuff. Jason Scott, who runs that. But it's got a lot of old phone phreaker text. You always have to take everything out there with a grain of salt because people would purposely put out bad information. People would unwittingly put out bad information. And then finally, Tina Kazeniak. She's a friend of mine, and it's really cool because she actually used to work in a telco fraud department. And just the stories, and we're good friends, but once upon a time, we would have been probably on opposite ends of the table, and it's just really cool because to have those stories, and they just sort of live to bust those smart kids horsing around the phone system doing stuff they weren't supposed to, and people trying to figure out how to not pay those expensive phone bills. So that's all I have. I'm not sure I'm doing on time, but I will open it up for questions if I have time. Yes?
Do you have a particularly crazy story you can tell from the fraud department?
So actually, crazy story from the fraud department was the question. It's kind of funny because when I showed Tina my Real Deal Lyman's handset, she actually kind of recalled a story where the Cincinnati Police Department actually got in a whole heap of trouble because actually Cincinnati Bell, their technicians got in a whole heap of trouble because the Cincinnati Police Department asked them to put in a phone tap. Now, they're law enforcement, right? So you might think that's cool. No, because that was under the jurisdiction of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. They did not have permission to tap that phone, and so that was like a huge ordeal where they were acting on behalf of law enforcement, but they did not have the blessing and approval from the FCC to do that. So that's kind of one of those interesting stories I had in chatting with Tina. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
When was the last time you saw a payphone?
Last time I saw a payphone, actually, Functional payphone. Actually, it was last weekend on my way back from B-Sides Nashville at a rest stop. Hit me up later. I'll show you the picture of it.
There's one in Rockville, South Carolina.
All right.
There's a few in Greece.
Yes.
Sir, what various colored boxes have you experimented with, or what kind of hardware hacking things have you built, electronics, or various projects you could maybe speak about?
Yeah, so I'm not the best person at it. Obviously, I've got some red box tones. I'm not going to, I'm going to invoke my Fifth Amendment right there and just stop and not admit to anything, particularly in a talk that's being recorded. Yeah, I don't know. I may have done a few things that once upon a time may have made the FCC frown a little bit. I'm not the best hardware guy, which is why I use the software tone generator to make those tones, which is why I'm trying to get my buddy to build me a modern-day blue box because I don't have the skill, frankly, to do it myself. So I'm not the best representation for that. I was much better at software, and once upon a time I could code, not so much anymore, but and then I do digital forensics and incident response now. That's my main deal, so... Yeah, and also I will say these days I'm an avowed white hat and very much don't do anything with unauthorized access, always have permission, my own stuff, that sort of thing. It is a good, great question, and people always share stories with me after this talk, which is what I love. Love hearing stories. So, yes? You possibly could find the old school boxes around. I actually gave this talk in Davenport, Iowa at CornCon, and one of the people that that sat in on it actually went because he helps run the local hackerspace, and he actually went and got the blue box his father built. Because it was only a few minutes away, he brought it back just to show me that he had this blue box that his father himself had built, which was very cool. I've not tried to buy any of this stuff myself, but I imagine if you look hard enough online, you might be able to find somebody that's got one for sale, something like that.
Got one in my toolbox. I just discovered it the other day for sale.
Nice, yeah. I mean, how can you not be sentimental? I've got this stuff that's practically worthless, but it would be darn near impossible to replace, particularly that acoustic coupler, right? You just don't see those, so.
I can share a technique that's not too difficult. The little birthday cards, the electronic birthday cards, you can record a message in there. That's very cheap electronics, and you can find one of those anywhere for less than $2, and you can make a little box out of that. You just record your quarter tones, dime tones, and the disparate kind of pattern, so it doesn't sound real regular. You drop a couple quarter tones, a couple dimes, a couple nickels. You just record that, and you play it back on your phone.
There you have it. Yes.
For people that want to play with this and not get arrested, this stuff is usually at least one big challenge at DEF CON. The Telephreaks is the big one, but there's a couple others.
All right, cool plug for Telefreaks at DEF CON and maybe some other things. And I have definitely heard stories of CTFs that incorporate old school phone phreaking stuff. Maybe where you decode and you get a phone number and there's a pay phone on the wall that you call and you get your little recorded message. And there's a lot of cool stuff. People have done amazing stuff with this. There really is a big nostalgic factor to it. So, all right, I'll take one more question if there is. All right, so what I want to tell everybody is this. If you want to get good information security, I don't care, offensive, defensive, whatever it is, learn to think like an attacker. And to help some of you with that, I brought some black hats.